General Yakovleff, thank you very much for taking time to speak with us. Your perspective as both military officer and a former NATO general is very valuable when discussing today's major geopolitical developments. Naturally, I would like to begin with Ukraine, because today Ukraine is shaping not only Europe's future, but in many ways the future of the world. This is especially significant given that for the first time in history, Ukrainian service members took part in France's Bastille Day military parade in Paris. Two Ukrainian pilots flew Mirage fighter jets supplied by France over the skies of Paris. Just a few years ago, such a scene would have been unimaginable. This year's Bastille Day sent a clear message of European unity and unwavering support for Ukraine. What does this mean to you, both as military strategist and as an expert of European security?
Well, all of that, of course, it's highly symbolic, and this is the last Bastille Day celebration that President Macron is going to preside over. Constitutionally, he can't go for third term. In any case, everyone doubts that he would be re-elected. So it's his farewell celebration. His first Bastille Day, by the way, 2 months after he was inaugurated, he invited America as the guest of honor. And that was with President Trump, newly arrived in office, himself also, just by a few months, who apparently greatly enjoyed the parade and wanted to copy it in Washington with, let's say, mixed result. So this is highly symbolic. President Macron has, I think, very consistently since 2022 done his best to support Ukraine and bring the whole of Europe on board. And though France is not the country that has given the most equipment in dollar terms to Ukraine, it is the first country that gave tanks, even if they were light tanks. They still meant other countries came up with Leopards, Abrams, Chieftains. And it's the first country that gave aircraft. 5 Mirage 2000 and possibly more. To include the training and so on. And these aircraft are extremely successful in the able hands of the Ukrainian Air Force. So let's say France has done its best, and France has been instrumental in the coalition of the willing. And the demonstration of Bastille Day was the coalition of the willing, of which first and foremost, of course, Ukraine. Now, the status of Ukraine in the world and in Europe has changed massively since 2022. I don't think I need to go back on that. I mean, the fact that Ukraine is doing much more than putting up resistance to Russia today, that Ukraine has arguably tipped the war in its favor. For the last few months, there's a general consensus that the war is going the way the Ukrainians want it to go and not the other way around. So I wouldn't say it's a victory parade, but it's definitely a symbol of unity behind Ukraine. Now, some of it is symbolic, and we are all aware that there may be big changes in the internal politics of major countries in Europe. France, with elections coming up, Germany with an unstable chancellor, Great Britain with a soon new prime minister. Macron is really pushing as hard as he can for as long as he'll be in office. And we would like to believe that the trends he has set will endure beyond him, but it's not a given.
Yes, Ukraine's former foreign minister, Dmytro Kuleba, recently said that Putin is now playing for time. According to Kuleba, Putin is waiting for Emmanuel Macron's presidency to come to an end, hoping that France will then have a president who is more favorable to his interests. What is your assessment? Do you believe Putin is deliberately waiting for a political change in France?
Well, it's a definite risk that the new president, the next president, would not necessarily be completely friendly with Putin. Even the Rassemblement National, Marine Le Pen, has kind of dropped most of her pro-Russian rhetoric because the French population at large is pretty solidly behind Ukraine. Now, not necessarily eager to go to war for Ukraine, but supporting Ukraine. I mean, it would be a big shift if all of a sudden the new president of France said, "Oh, I'm in love with Putin, and I'm going to throw Ukraine, under the carriage." I'm not sure it would wash well in France to include many voters of Rassemblement National, far-right president. I rule out the far-left Mélenchon because he's a paleo-communist. He congratulated the president of Venezuela when he was fraudulently re-elected for the third time, Maduro. Imagine that, a French so-called Democrat, party leader, congratulating a dictator on his third fraudulent election.
Yes, of course, that risk exists. You have repeatedly argued that the war in Ukraine has fundamentally transformed Europe's security architecture. However, Ukraine's recent success on the battlefield, along with its precise strategic strikes deep inside Russian territory, seem to confirm once again that Europe has entered a completely new military and political era. Has the moment arrived when Europe can no longer afford the luxury of living under the old illusions of security?
Oh, yes, definitely. And though there may be different visions or understandings of it, but the idea that we Europeans are on our own soon, not necessarily today, the Americans are still around, but that the American alliance is much less secure than before. And also, of course, Trump has made very nasty noises about Greenland and Canada, so it doesn't help. So even the Germans, who until last year were considered that America is the bedrock of European security, and the Europeans kind of complement the effort, even the Germans have switched, and that we now need a European defense. So they are actually, the rest of Europe is understanding what France has said for 50 years. 50 years. That much as we love America, and we respect America, and we want America to stay engaged with us, and we believe it's mutually beneficial, by the way, we should not presume that America will do exactly what we want it to do. And we need to develop, in particular, our own defense industry. Now, in that respect, Ukraine has changed the world, because Ukraine now, this year, produces more than 70% of what it needs and 100% of what makes the big difference, in particular drones, and has made enormous advances in doctrine, equipment. For example, with the drones comes navigation, electronic warfare, counter-electronic warfare, and so on. So now the real military power in Europe is Ukraine. So it is in our best interest, all of us, to join up with Ukraine.
So just to clarify your point, does this mean that Europe must unite around Ukraine?
Yes, and this is why I believe we should have a permanent force, rotational, into Ukraine as a guarantee force, but also because it will be the best opportunity for us to be trained by the Ukrainians. And we will become much more proficient after 2 or 3 years, rotating units for 4-6 months. All the nations participating in the coalition of the willing will develop competencies that the others won't. End of story. So you'll have a modern European force and a less modern other force.
That is a very interesting formula for Europe's allies, provided they truly take it into account. Following the NATO summit, we witnessed a decision that many have described as revolutionary. The United States agreed to provide Ukraine with additional Patriot air defense capabilities. This creates an entirely new reality. From your perspective, what practical difference will this make for Ukraine, which continues to face daily attacks from Russian ballistic missiles?
Yes, for sure, once Ukraine can produce enough interceptors, whether they are Patriot or others, interceptors to protect it against the Russian threat, it will be a major change. That said, I don't know how long it will take to reach that. I have a suspicion that just giving the license to develop the product doesn't mean that Ukraine is producing Patriots, in September. I have a suspicion we're talking of 1 year or more. So it is a midterm solution. Beyond the minor fact that Trump doesn't necessarily have the authority to give the license to produce Patriots to another country if the producer of the Patriots doesn't want to, because I suspect RTX, Raytheon, the integrator of the Patriot, the main contractor for the Patriot, I suspect they have a fair amount of intellectual property that the US government does not have. Trump is extremely generous with something that is not in his remit. RTX, Raytheon, the maker of the Patriot, is a commercial firm. They make a profit. They are not philanthropy. So chances are that, they're going to negotiate hard the license to make money out of it. It can take time, if only because it may be that a number of items of intellectual property are not of themselves the property of Raytheon either. So there may be a cascade. So what I'm saying is that I'm not sure of what I'm saying. I have a suspicion that there is, first of all, commercial, intellectual property, legal, blah, 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 financial issue to sort out before we actually start building the factory. And so I doubt the first Ukrainian-built Patriots will be in service, by mid-2027. It would be, in my eyes, a miracle.
Yes, however, Ukrainian media have reported that there are indications negotiations have already begun regarding a licensing agreement with a manufacturer of the Patriot system. I suppose this goes some way toward addressing the concerns you mentioned earlier.
Yeah. Now, it's symbolic that Trump said, now, Trump didn't say, we're going to do it. He said, I'm considering, something like that. Even Trump used hedging words. So, considering his track record of saying things to be nice to people, and the following day he says, I never said that. You see what I mean? The proof is in the pudding. Huh? When we'll see the Patriots made in Ukraine, then we can say that it's worked. Until then, it's hope more than reality.
And of course, we also have to take into account the Trump factor and the broader geopolitical landscape. If we eventually see Patriot systems being manufactured in Ukraine, what meaningful options will remain in Vladimir Putin's arsenal, aside from nuclear threats? What leverage would he still have? And in that scenario, what role could the United States and China play? Would either of them allow Putin to resort to the use of nuclear weapons against Ukraine?
Well, from what I've read, China has been behind the scenes very insistent on don't play stupid with nuclear weapons. So I tend to see the nuclear bluff as a bluff. Now, I may be proven wrong. Huh? You see what I mean? I'm not the one who writes history. But other than nuclear and the continued destruction of buildings in Ukraine, I don't see any military option for Putin. The options are closing down on him, actually, because the gradual destruction of the energy infrastructure in Russia is hurting, and it's cumulative, that the Russians cannot repair basically what is destroyed. They have big difficulties repairing. So every percent taken down will remain taken down, basically. And also you have on the front line the fact that the attrition rates for the Russian forces apparently have outstepped their recruitment for at least 4 months. And also Crimea is virtually cut off. So, I mean, the military options for Putin are diminishing, and the military options for Ukraine are increasing, apart from, well, receiving missiles on Kiev, basically, or Odessa last night.
Do you believe Ukraine will eventually be able to regain Crimea?
Certainly not by assault. I don't see them as having the means to assault. But they are making Crimea untenable by the Russians. So I doubt they'll ever recover Crimea through negotiation. But when the Putin regime will fall, all cards will be on the table again. If Putin's regime falls and there is a revolution and a semi-civil war in Russia, then the soldiers currently manning the defense, the Russian defense in Crimea, will go back home to participate in the civil war to save their families. So my perception is that in the current status, there's no way Ukraine can recover Crimea by force, but it can make Crimea a rotten fruit that will fall to the ground one day.
That seems to be exactly what the Ukrainians are trying to do now. You have repeatedly argued that the collapse of Putin's regime is the only way to ensure that Russia will no longer be capable of waging aggressive wars against its neighbors. Do you already see signs that this process has begun? In your view, under what circumstances will Putin realize that events are no longer unfolding in his favor and that he has in fact lost this war?
Well, I think he's realizing that the war is not going his way. He may have realized that he's losing the war, but he does not have any other option. If he stops doing the war, I think his regime will crash. So his fate is linked to the war, whether victorious or not. I think the only real card that Putin has today is not military, it's Trump. It's the fact that Trump is still, I believe, very much in love with him. And Putin, I think his theory of victory is to have Trump deliver Ukraine. It is still to have Trump do the dirty job for him. Now, Trump has moved a bit. I'm not sure that he has his instincts have done in about a complete 180 degrees. I'm convinced that Putin believes that Trump is his savior. And as soon as Trump will be less busy with Iran, Putin will call on him to save him.
We'll see. You expressed the same view during your previous interviews. However, many argue that Donald Trump tends to side with winners and strong leaders. Today, President Zelensky increasingly appears to fit that description. He correctly identified Russia's oil infrastructure as one of its greatest strategic aims, and Ukraine strikes have proven remarkably effective. Following the sustained campaign of Ukrainian drone attacks, Russia, one of the world's largest oil producers, is now reportedly facing fuel shortages. There are even reports that in some regions, farmers have struggled to harvest their crops because of fuel deficit. Wars are ultimately won by resources. How serious is the loss of this strategic asset for Russia?
Well, there it's obvious that the Russian economy is going to the wall. It's crashing. Now, there may be differences in opinions on the figures, but for sure, it's a war economy that has eaten up the rest of the economy. Even its war economy, its war production has plateaued since 2024. They can't produce more missiles than they are now, whereas Ukraine can produce more and better missiles than it is now. So they're losing that race. The economy, the demographics, also the fact that the popular support for the war is crumbling, because most Russians believed or pretended to believe that the war did not involve them. Well, that has died, basically. So there are every factor for a crash of the regime is there. It's acid eating through the regime. How long will the regime stay? I don't know. It could be months, could be years. I believe not many years. And after that, we're in for a sea change. Now, Trump, yes, he loves winners, but he has a personal hatred for Zelensky since his first mandate, when Zelensky didn't help him with the Hunter Biden story. He's humiliated Zelensky. Now, Zelensky may forget or forgive, but Trump is not the kind of guy who forgets or forgives. So I am convinced that Trump is doing the nice words to Zelensky now because he finds it expedient. But I'm convinced that his inner instinct is still for Putin. Now, Zelensky has talked of an election by the end of this year. I doubt he will stand again. I think he's fed up with it. I'm not sure he would be re-elected, by the way. Just like Churchill was not re-elected in 1946, even though he had won the Second World War. And if, for example, the new president is Zaluzhny, then we may have someone that Trump will actually love, instinctively go for. And that could change his attitude.
Yes, and General Valery Zaluzhny himself has reportedly informed President Zelensky that he intends to run in the elections.
Well, from what I've read in the press, he has a very high opinion favorability rate, and he is considered a statesman, and I don't believe Zelensky will go for re-election in any case. Now, even if it's not Zaluzhny, I mean, it can be anyone else. But for Trump to get rid of Zelensky, which would enable Putin, by the way, to say there's been a change in Kiev, so now I'm ready to talk. It can be a face-saving way for Putin and Trump to start talking, except that since 2 years ago, one thing has changed massively, and it's Europe. Today, the main obstacle between the seizure of Ukraine and Putin is Europe. And Europe is becoming more and more united, and Europe will not necessarily agree to a Trumpian peace surrender in practice to Putin.
Indeed, Europe's role has grown significantly. That became evident in the NATO summit, the G7 meeting, and once again in Paris during the gathering of the Coalition of the Willing. However, I'd like to return to May 9, a date of enormous symbolic and political importance for both Russia and Vladimir Putin personally. Many observers argued that this year Victory Day parade looked less like a display of triumph and more like a symbol of weakness and humiliation. Shortly afterwards, we witnessed powerful explosions in Moscow and dramatic images of parts of the Russian capital engulfed in flames, creating an even stronger impression. What psychological and military impact do events like that have on Russia?
Well, it looks like, from what I've read, the Russian population, and mostly the white Russian population, St. Petersburg and Moscow, they are the only population for whom Putin has an interest. The other guys, Bashkortostan and wherever, Dagestan or Siberia and so on, he doesn't give a damn. They go to bleed in Ukraine. That's their fate. But he is very concerned about the white Russians, St. Petersburg and Moscow. And they are turning, now they don't dare say that they're turning against the regime, but they have realized that the war has come to them. That's a massive, from what I read, it's a massive change in the Russian political life. Even the influencers, even a number of crackpots on Russian TV are starting to doubt. When you start to doubt, it's the beginning of the end for any dictatorship.
Watching Moscow in flames, many people were reminded of 1812. In your opinion, what would Napoleon have said if he had seen these images?
I suspect Napoleon would have the same respect for Ukraine as he had for General Kutuzov.
I asked because Prince Bagration has Georgian origin.
Yeah, Bagration and Kutuzov. I think it's Kutuzov who did the maneuver to force La Grande Armée back from where it had come through to Moscow. Napoleon had great respect for these Russian generals, for sure.
Finally, let's return to today's geopolitical reality. Why, in your opinion, did the West allow Putin to go this far? It began with Russia's invasion of Georgia in 2008, followed by the annexion of Crimea in 2014, and ultimately the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022. After each act of aggression, the international response proved insufficient, and the Kremlin appears to have interpreted that restraint as weakness. Why did the West fail to wake up after Putin's Munich Security Conference speech when he openly declared that he no longer accepted the existing international order? Was this a strategic miscalculation, political naivety, or deliberate policies that ultimately resulted in a far greater cost?
I think the West, and the West of the West, I'm not talking of Poland or the Baltics, the West believed that Russia culturally and economically is part of Europe. It's not part of Asia. And therefore, Putin's, let's say, antics, his excessive acts, well, you can explain them and so on. And ultimately, we want to have Russia back as a normal member of the European family. And they believed, some of them believed until 2022. And Putin was very good via his propaganda and his useful idiots and so on. Putin was very good in selling that message. The first message being that be nice to me because I'm part of the family. Even if I behave like a bandit from time to time, I'm still part of the family. And also by daring to do things, he took everyone by surprise. And ultimately, neither France nor Germany wanted to start the Third World War over Crimea or Georgia. So Russian propaganda was very good. And also another factor of propaganda was very good in saying, don't be escalatory. I remember being in NATO 2009, talking with diplomats and so on, and they were saying, we must not be escalatory. So for me, when I said, look, how they have attacked Georgia, well, if we hit them back, that is not escalatory. Oh, yes, it is escalatory. Well, okay, so we've already lost, kind of. So it took the failure of 2022, the Russian failure of 2022, to change those parameters. But it's still a valid point not to risk the future of humanity on this planet for Crimea. I can understand that.
What impact could Senator Lindsey Graham's sanctions bill against Russia have? President Trump has suggested that Iran and Hezbollah should also be included. How do you assess that proposal?
I didn't know that there were sanctions left that could be applied to Iran and Hezbollah. I'm not being flippant there. I understood that, in essence, America has gone to the very end of what it can do that looks like a sanction for Iran and Hezbollah. So I don't know what else they have.
CNN recently aired satellite images showing that Iran is attempting to rebuild parts of its nuclear facilities and restore infrastructure related to its ballistic missile program. Does this suggest that military strikes alone are insufficient to stop Iran's strategic ambitions? What, in your view, would constitute a realistic and sustainable solution of this crisis?
Yeah. My opinion is that this war is a completely stupid war that has not reached its objective, if there was an objective, that will never reach it. And Trump is trying to get out of it, and he cannot get out of it. Ultimately, the ones who will let him out of this war are the Iranians. And the Iranians have taken a big bashing. So now they want to humiliate Trump. They want him to realize that he lost the war. They want him to admit as much, kind of. So they're not going to help him. They're not going to help him out of this war. I remember Caroline Levitt, the porte-parole of the White House, at the beginning of the war, she was very arrogant and saying this war will end at the minute when President Donald J. Trump decides that the war is finished. Well, President Donald J. Trump has said that the war was over something like 50 times, and it's still not over. When you cannot get out of a war, it means that you're not winning.
The Strait of Hormuz is one of the world's most strategically important maritime checkpoints and a vital artery for global energy supplies. If Iran were to attempt to block the strait, how realistic is it that NATO members and the United States, key allies, would become directly involved?
Yeah, well, I have frustration with Trump also. First of all, he started the war as a big surprise. And after that, he says everyone should do this or that. That's not how it works. And that's not how it works in our families, and it's not how it works in this world. For NATO to do something, there is a process. The process starts with an agreement on the end state. What is the end state of this operation? So if Trump wants NATO to do something, let him produce a 2-paragraph statement of the desired end state for NATO. And then we'll start talking. That's what it looks like. And I'm saying that not because NATO is a talk shop, but because NATO is an alliance of free and sovereign countries. If they go to war, they want to know why, what for, and to do what. That is exactly the planning process at NATO. It's not the same thing as being told, come tonight, from someone who didn't tell you yesterday that he was starting a big war. So my personal opinion is, you break it, you own it. It's your war, my friend. You live with it. We've got to face the consequences. The rest of the world, and not only Europe, Africa in particular, has got to face the consequences of your epic stupidity. But there's not much that we, NATO, could do, and I don't see why we would do it, beyond the fact that it's out of NATO area, by the way, and that Trump started this war. You know, in 1956, Great Britain and France went to war against Egypt to secure the Suez Canal that he had just nationalized. And Khrushchev sent an ultimatum saying, get out of there or I'll bomb you. So the UK and France turned to America. President Eisenhower, a Republican, saying, could you explain to Khrushchev that, you protect us? And Eisenhower told them, my friend, it's none of my business. It's not NATO. You started it. You are not under my protection. So my thing is that this Eisenhower doctrine, it's your war. It's not NATO interest in it. So it's none of my business. We should apply, and we are applying, to Trump, the Eisenhower doctrine. Eisenhower, an American president and a Republican. This is the Eisenhower doctrine. You wanted that war, we didn't, so you sort it out.
I understand Europe's position and I understand your assessment. However, the Strait of Hormuz is one of the world's most critical energy hubs, and any disruption there would have immediate consequences for the global economy. Every country depends on oil, including Europe. And under those circumstances, do you believe Europe would still refrain from becoming military involved?
Yes, Yes, as I said, we've got to live with the consequences, which is why we are extremely frustrated. There's something to be said that by intervening, we could make things worse, more complicated, and so on. So, and by the way, Trump wants us to be part of his operation, but he doesn't want us to be part of the negotiation. If he said the deal is we do a joint NATO operation, and the deal is that we set up a mechanism whereby NATO interests are taken care of in the negotiation with the Iranians and the Israelis in passing, and the Lebanese, by the way. If he said that and we could believe him, then I could change my position. I could say, okay, it's the price to pay to be part of the talking. But we all know that we'll never be part of the talking. So let's not be part of the shooting. That's a hard view that I have, and I suspect President Macron has it also.
And finally, what message would you like to send to Georgia?
No, I'd love to be more optimistic about Georgia. I'd love to be as optimistic about Georgia as I am about Ukraine. Okay, so hopefully in a few months, we'll be there.
Do you believe that Ukrainian victory would reshape the entire region?
Yes. Yeah, if the Putin regime crumbles, there'll be people in South Ossetia and Abkhazia who may have different views about Tbilisi.
In your opinion, does Bidzina Ivanishvili realize that Putin's position is steadily weakening, yet continues imprisoning political opponents and political leaders? Why do you think he persists with this course of action?
No. He's chosen the wrong horse.
General Yakovleff, thank you very much for this remarkably candid, insightful, and thought-provoking conversation.
Thank you.